Many people think of the dividing line between the U.S. and Mexico as fixed, as something that's always been there. But 172 years ago, what we now consider the Southwest wasn't part of the U.S. at all. It was actually the northmost part of Mexico. But the U.S. was not content with what it had, pushing westward to seize the land that many presidents believed was America's destiny. To reach that goal, President James Polk provoked war with Mexico. After a long and bloody battle, the U.S. occupied much of Mexico. The two countries decided to work up an agreement, and Mexico ceded half their country to the United States. This part is important. There was an agreement called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It gave around 100,000 Mexican nationals living in those territories citizenship if they decided to stay. But more importantly, the agreement protected the rights of any Mexican whose land was now part of the U.S. But when the treaty got sent to Congress, the Senate removed the part that protected the land claims of Mexicans who now lived in America. This would forever change the fate of generations of Mexican Americans to come.
Your body tells you when to stop. My family has settled this area for literally centuries.
So we have very deep, deep native roots here.
We're at the top of El Cerro de Tomé, in Tomé, New Mexico, established in 1739.
Our eastern boundary was the top of the crest of the mountain, the Manzano Mountain. So that was the original boundary.
We've lost some land through the years. At one point, several years ago, we were a landless land grant, literally. And we originally had 123,000 acres of land. Today, Tomé has approximately 400 acres.
My name is Andrea Padilla. America owes us the opportunity to take care of our own communities.
My name is Rita Padilla Gutierrez. I think regaining some of our land back would be justice.
This is kind of our land grant room. Here we have the patent signed by Ulysses Grant. This is the patent that was granted after the war with Mexico and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo to honor our land grant, and it's signed by Ulysses Grant, who was president at the time. Seal and everything granting us that our land grant would continue to be ours. So this is it. Again, but then later they stole our mountain, so.
My name is Arturo Archuleta. I'm a land grant heir to two land grants, the Manzano and the Tierra Maria land grant. We're a land-based people. Half of our soul was here before Columbus ever hit the sand. We come from some of the Spanish communities that came over, as well as Native American communities. So we really are sort of mestizo, we're mixed. This was my grandfather's plot. So this is a traditional jacal house. On this side, you can see they actually used adobe. My dad grew up here, but then he left in the 70s, didn't have opportunities. That's the stuff that's hard to swallow when you're like, man, like this is something that was in our family and it belonged to us. And because the circumstances beyond our control, the loss of the commons, the poverties that created, this drives the work that I do, working with land-grant communities and trying to get justice for our communities. There's a huge disparity here in terms of poverty, in terms of education. These communities have been left behind. The land grant and the treaty issues is probably what you consider the first Latino issue in this country, and it's still unresolved.
What happened with Mexican Americans in some ways is a quintessential American story. We like to tell ourselves that we are a country of great values and that we follow through on the promises that we make. But again and again, we saw that the federal government would make promises to groups and then would just turn its back on those promises.
When Mexico negotiates the treaty in good faith, assuming that all of its citizens' rights will be respected, what it doesn't understand is that for the United States, only whites have the right to full citizenship. And so the territorial governments systematically go about disenfranchising all Mexican citizens who they deem to not be white.
So this is a collection of documents that spans all the way from the late Spanish colonial period all the way through the 20 years into the U.S. territorial period. This grant goes from a over 400,000 acre grant to a 1,422 acre grant. So this is the 38,000 acres, and they're reduced down to about 4,500 acres. You know, the longevity that we have in this place, you know, that these communities existed 100, 150 years before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. But it's beyond sense of place. It's also this commitment that you have to make sure this place survives. Our identity is tied to place, but we don't see that place having an identity without us either. So it defines us just as much as we define it.
It hurt my father deeply because he fought to the very end, you know, telling people you can't do this, you can't do this. Once you sell your land, that's it. You're nothing. You lose your culture, you lose everything. This land should have never been sold, it should still be ours. So people who didn't have a lot of acreage other than that lost their way of life.
I just don't think people get the passion that's attached to this. It's the history, for God's sake. Plain and simple. Your language, your customs, your food, your traditions. But for us, it's being a land-based people.
Today there's a lot of rhetoric about the Mexicans and anti-Mexican. It does hit me in the heart.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
What happens when the vast majority of those people are dispossessed and that land is given to white settlers? The representation of Mexicans as these barbarous Indians, that's enunciated every day when we hear Mexicans described as rapists, murderers, and thieves.
We always worked hard. And we made a living and we did the right thing. So when they talk about lazy Mexicans or these Mexicans are all drug dealers and murderers, I'm like, where? I haven't seen that. I'm not, you know.
Some of these questions of racism that are resurfacing, you know, for communities like us, we know it's never gone away. It's not like a surprise or a shock that, oh my gosh, like, how did this country become so racist? We've always felt it. We've always known it. We've been on the receiving end of it either through the institutions, through the bureaucracies, or at the individual level.
Back in the 60s, there was an individual by the name of Reyes Lopez Tejerina.
Or 15 million Spanish Americans throughout the Southwest have a great reason to fight for the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
He came to New Mexico preaching the treaty and telling the people that they were going to lose their land.
That kind of culminates in a courthouse, a raid, it ends up in a shootout. like, hey, there's a civil war in New Mexico and these people are fed up, and they send in the National Guard.
They put all the heirs of different land grants that were the followers of Tejerina in a corral, like sheep.
So the move to Chicano, Chicanx, is precisely a move to reclaim our own indigenous heritage, our own original belongings to these territories, right? That's why the Reyes Tijerina, Tierra Amarilla movement is a huge part of the Chicano movement, because they were articulating it concretely, saying like, we have these land grants and we want these land grants honored as per the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
He opened our eyes, he taught us, and he always said, no, change the law. And we've always tried that.
My name is Arturo Archuleta, and I am here on behalf of the New Mexico Land Grant Council. So what the current legislation does is it would create a federal definition of traditional uses on federal lands for land grant communities, access to fuel wood, for example, to heat your home, access to pasture to graze livestock, and it would also require that the federal agencies work with land grant communities and consult with them.
The dream of reparation would be that we'd get our land back.
I also think our communities are due some type of a reparations in terms of a monetary compensation for all the hardships that they've endured. What that figure looks like to us, if we did a calculation, probably about $2.7 billion, not to pay out individuals, but to pay out our communities for community development and to buy back land.
We're going to have a museum open to the public, the old jail where we think Billy the Kid spent one night. The idea is to keep the legacy alive, to not destroy and forget the history.
We don't want handouts. We want to provide for ourselves. So justice would be giving us that opportunity to do that.
I know that the hard work of my dad and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, that their blood, sweat, and tears, that's something that I have to make sure that none of that was for vain, and that their hopes and dreams survive on, and they survive on in my kids and their kids.
We've always been here, and we're not going anywhere. This is who we are, this is where we come from, this is our land, and we're going to protect it, and we're going to continue to be here as long as we possibly can.